They said he didn't even have a name. Just another homeless kid beneath a bridge. But tonight, you'll hear his voice. And the story of the old dog who never left his side. If stories about courage, loyalty, and quiet rebellion move you, tap that subscribe button. Because here, forgotten souls don't stay forgotten forever. The bridge didn't look like much. Just a forgotten chunk of concrete and rusted steel, stretching over a dry creek that hadn't seen a real rain in years. Most folks in Dover passed it every day without a second glance. But for Eli, that bridge was home. He never called it that, not out loud. Calling it home felt like lying. Homes had warmth. Homes had doors. Homes had people waiting for you. That bridge? It had none of that. Just shadows, wind, and the low hum of tires passing overhead. But it had Shadow. Shadow was a big dog, probably. Part shepherd, part who knows what. His fur was gray where it hadn't been caked with dirt, and one of his eyes was clouded over, blind from some fight long before Eli met him. His ribs showed, and he limped on cold mornings. But he never left Eli's side. They found each other one night when Eli was still figuring out how to be invisible. He'd been sleeping behind a Dollar General, curled up against a wall, when he heard the growl. Low, steady, not angry, just. Warning, Eli didn't run. He didn't even flinch. He just looked up from beneath his hoodie and met the dog's gaze. There was something in the boy's eyes, something wounded, not weak. Shadow must have recognized it. He didn't growl again. He just sat down beside the boy and stayed there. That was 8 months ago. Now the two of them moved like shadows. Through the edges of town, they had their routine. Wake up under the bridge. Sneak over to the back alley behind Franco's bakery where the trash bags always smelled like heaven. Then head to the library to sit in the warmth for a few hours if. No one noticed them. Eli didn't talk much. Not because he couldn't, just because no one ever listened. Words felt wasted on people who looked through him. But Shadow listened. Always. Eli talked to him about everything, how the nights felt colder lately, how sometimes he still dreamed. About the smell of his mother's shampoo, how he hated the way people wrinkled their noses when he passed. He didn't remember exactly when his name stopped being used. It was like one day he was Elijah James' third grader who loved science, fairs and spelling bees, and the next he was just that kid. Then the homeless boy. Then nothing. He'd tried once to ask for help. At 10 years old. After his mom was arrested and he was left at a neighbor's house who didn't want him, he'd walked into a police station. He stood at the counter, holding a school ID and shaking. "I need help," he'd said. The officer never looked up from his computer. "No loitering," he barked. That was the last time Eli asked anyone for anything. Now, at 14, he didn't even think about asking. He just survived, day by day, bread crust by bread crust. His only concern each night was making sure Shadow had enough to eat. He often went to sleep hungry himself. But Shadow always got the bigger piece. That was the deal. That was loyalty. That morning, the air carried a sharp edge. Not quite winter yet, but close enough to make bones ache if you slept on cement. Eli blinked awake as sunlight broke through the cracks in the bridge's steel girders, landing in strips across his face. And the side of Shadow's curled body. He reached over, scratching behind the dog's ears. Shadow let out a soft grunt, lifted his head, and sniffed the air. His good eye, the golden one, always seemed to know what kind of day it would be. "Yeah," Eli murmured. "We better move before the trucks come." The trucks, garbage pickups. Construction workers, cops, anyone in a uniform, usually meant trouble. Eli gathered their stuff into his backpack, a tattered black bag with one strap knotted and duct taped. Inside, a damp hoodie, a cracked flashlight, a water bottle he refilled from the gas station sink, a comic book with no cover, and a folded piece of paper he never let go of. Shadow's food bowl was a butter container from a diner's trash. Eli tucked it under his arm as they climbed up the hill to the edge of town. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Eli walked. Shadow followed. Always on the left. Always watching his boy's back. By the time they reached Franco's bakery, the smells had already crept into the alley. Bread, sugar, butter. Franco's was owned by a short, round man who yelled at pigeons and believed homeless kids invited crime. But his workers weren't all like him. There was a woman with copper-colored braids and eyes tired like they'd seen too much, who always left the trash bags just slightly open, and always with a half loaf of day-old rye on top. That morning was no different. Eli waited until no one was around, then darted behind the dumpster. Shadow stayed at the edge, ears perked. Eli reached into the bag, pulled out the loaf, and broke it in half. He sat cross-legged on the cold concrete, offering the bigger half to Shadow without thinking. Shadow hesitated. Eli smirked. "Don't look at me like that, you're older." The dog took the bread gently and laid down beside him. They chewed in silence. After breakfast, they wandered toward the library. On Tuesdays, the elderly librarian, Mrs. Dawell, was the one on duty. She never said much to Eli, but she didn't call security either. That made her a saint in his book. Eli liked the library. Not just for the warmth, for the quiet, for the rows of books that didn't care what he looked like or where he slept. Books didn't flinch when his coat smelled like the river. Books didn't whisper behind their hands. He'd found a corner near the back, a spot where the heater worked and the camera didn't reach, and he'd curl up with Shadow lying beneath his chair. That day, he grabbed a book on wolves. Shadow always reminded him of one. Wild, stubborn, loyal to death. A page caught his eye about how wolves howl not just to call the pack, but to say, "I'm here, I'm alive. I belong." He didn't realize. His fingers were shaking until Shadow nuzzled his knee. Eli looked down. "Do you think I belong anywhere?" The dog licked his knuckle. "Didn't think so." When the library closed early that day, Eli wandered toward the grocery store on 14th Street. Not to steal. Not yet, just to look. Sometimes the clerk at the back would slip him a bruised apple, if no one was watching. But today was different. Today, the manager was there. The angry one with the mustache. The one who once said Eli smelled like a wet carpet and threatened to hose him down if he saw him again. Eli didn't plan to go in. He just stood outside, watching people walk by with paper bags and plastic smiles. Then he saw her, a girl, maybe 7 or 8, wearing a sweatshirt too thin for the weather, sitting on the curb with her knees hugged to her chest. Her lips were purple. Her eyes didn't blink. She wasn't crying, but she looked like she'd forgotten how. Shadow padded up beside her and sat. She looked at the dog. Then at Eli. "Is he yours?" Eli nodded. "He's nice," she whispered. "He didn't bite me." Eli glanced around. No one was watching. No one ever did. "Where's your mom?" "She left. Said she'd be back before it got dark." "What's your name?" The girl shrugged. "Maya, maybe. That's what she calls me sometimes." That maybe hurt more than any winter wind. Eli looked down at Shadow, who stared back like he already knew what Eli was thinking. The kid had nothing. Not even a name that felt real. But he had something Maya didn't right now: bread. And a little bit of strength left. "I'll be right back," he said, and left Shadow sitting beside her like a silent guard. He didn't run into the store. He walked straight to the bakery aisle. His hands trembled. He saw a bag of rolls 4 for $1, and for a second, he thought, maybe I can pay. Maybe someone will understand. He took the bag and walked to the counter. The clerk behind the register stepped away. Then the manager stepped in. "What the hell are you doing in here?" He snapped. Eli froze. I just wanted. You people think you can just walk in and what? Beg? Steal? "I told you last time, I have a dog tag," Eli blurted. "I can." "Leave it." "What?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small metal tag on a chain. Shadow's the only real thing he had left of anyone who'd stayed. "I swear. It's worth more than the bread. Please, She's cold out there. Just let me, the manager. Snatch the bread from his hands. Get out. Before I call the cops. He shoved Eli backward. Eli stumbled, hit the counter, then bolted for the door. Outside, Maya was gone. So was Shadow. The panic hit fast. Eli stumbled out into the cold air, his heart thudding like a drum inside his chest. The spot where Maya had been sitting, where Shadow had been waiting loyally, was now just empty curb and dust. He spun around. Left, right, down the block. Across the street. Nothing. The world moved like it always did. Cars passed. People laughed on their phones. A couple argued in the distance. And somewhere in all that noise, his only family had vanished. Shadow, he called, loud enough to draw a few looks. Maya? No answer. His legs moved before his brain could catch up. He sprinted past the parking lot, down the alleyway behind the store, his eyes darting into corners, dumpsters, doorways. Nothing. His lungs burned. He called again. Shadow. Nothing. He stood there, fists clenched, teeth grinding against a scream he didn't want to release. He couldn't afford to lose it. Not now. But then a sound. Faint. Far off. A bark. One bark. Sharp. Familiar. He turned on his heel and ran. Down the alley, across another street, past the old laundromat with the flickering neon open sign that hadn't worked in years. There. At the edge of an abandoned lot, half hidden behind a dumpster, Shadow stood with his ears back and body stiff, blocking the path of a man in a dirty hoodie who was gripping Maya by the wrist. Let her go, Eli said, breathless. The man turned. He was tall and ragged, eyes sunken, face twitchy. Eli recognized the look. Meth, desperation. This yours? The man said, yanking Maya forward. She whimpered. I said let her go. Eli stepped forward. Shadow growled, deep and rising. The man hesitated. Just for a second. Then muttered, not worth it. He shoved Maya down and took off down the alley, vanishing like smoke. Eli rushed over. Shadow stepped aside. Maya was shaking. But she hadn't cried. Not once. You okay? Eli asked. She nodded, small and silent. Shadow walked a slow circle around them, like he had to double-check the danger was really gone, then flopped down with a heavy grunt. Eli let out a breath. Sat on the curb beside Maya. That guy won't be back, he said. Maya looked at him, eyes wide. You yelled at him. Eli shrugged. Yeah, well, he messed with the wrong dog. She smiled. Just a little. Just enough to light up the cracks in her cold face. They stayed there until the sun dropped behind the gas station. Then, without saying much, they walked back to the bridge. That night, under the rusted ribs of steel and cement, Eli gave Maya the hoodie from his backpack and let her curl up against Shadow's side. The dog didn't protest. He just laid there, tail thumping gently, as if he knew this was bigger than warmth. It was protection. It was presence. Eli didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the pillar, staring at the dark, listening to cars above, wondering if that was what it meant to be alive, to disappear every night and pray you came back visible. In the morning, he pulled the folded paper from his bag again, unfolded it with hands too familiar with roughness. The letter. It was addressed to Unit 14A, Pine Ridge Correctional Facility. It had no stamp. He'd never mailed it. He'd just read it. Sometimes, dear Mama, I still got Shadow. He's a good dog. He don't leave me, even when I smell like trash or cry in my sleep. I think he remembers you. I talk about you sometimes, not loud, just in my head. They say you hit Daddy. I don't believe them. I remember what he did. I remember you screaming. I remember the blood. I remember your hands shaking after they took you away. They said I'd get put somewhere safe. But safe didn't show up. Safe forgot. So me and Shadow, we just keep walking. But I still got your name in my head. I still remember mine. Love, Elijah. He folded the paper again, pressed it against his chest. Then he closed his eyes. The next morning came too soon. Ellie was stiff from the cold, his limbs slow to move. Maya still slept, her breath shallow under the hoodie. Shadow had curled himself around her like a blanket with fur. For a moment, things almost felt safe. Like maybe they'd figured out their own tiny world under the bridge, where three forgotten souls could exist without being stared at, shoved, or told they didn't belong. But that world shattered fast. A voice rang out from the edge of the embankment. "Hey, you two, hands where I can see him." Flashlights, boots, radios crackling. Eli's body tensed. Shadow jumped to his feet, barking. Two police officers, one older, stiff in posture, the other younger, wide-eyed, approached fast, hands hovering over holsters. Eli instinctively stepped in front of Maya. "We're not doing anything," he said quickly, arms up. "We just slept here." "We didn't," the older cop barked. "Quiet. What's your name?" Eli hesitated. Wrong move. "No ID? No guardian?" The officer snapped. "This the kid who stole from Michael Lister's last night?" Eli's eyes widened. "I didn't," the younger cop pointed. "That him, same hoodie." "No," Maya whispered. "He didn't steal anything." "Little girl, you need to step away," the officer said. Shadow began growling again. Louder now. He stood between the cops and Eli, hackles raised, his one good eye burning gold. The older officer pulled out his baton. "Get that mutt back or I'll put it down." "No," Eli shouted. "He's not gonna hurt anyone, please. He's just scared." The officer advanced anyway. Shadow barked and lunged, not to bite, but to block. To protect. The baton came down fast. Crack! A yelp. Shadow dropped. Eli's scream was guttural. Maya started crying. "Stop!" Eli begged. "He's old. He's not dangerous, he's just mine." The officers pinned Eli down. The boy didn't fight. He just twisted his neck to see Shadow, who was limping toward him, one paw dragging behind, eyes locked with his boy's. "Don't take me from him," Eli whispered. "Please don't." They cuffed him anyway. The last thing Eli saw before the squad car door slammed shut was Shadow lying beside the bridge, head on his paws, breathing hard, still waiting. Somewhere else, far away from the bridge and the alleys and the bakery trash bags, people started talking. Someone had filmed it. Not the whole thing. Just the part where a boy in cuffs screamed for his dog. Where a police baton dropped and a dog cried out. Where a girl's voice pleaded. He didn't steal. The video went up that night. 30 seconds, grainy, shaky, caption, "They arrested a homeless boy and hit his dog too." It started with 10 shares, then 100, then 10,000. No one knew his name. Not yet, but they would. Eli sat on the edge of a cold plastic bench, both hands cuffed in front of him, the chain tight against his thin wrists. His hoodie was still damp from the night before, and the blood from Shadow's paw had dried in a dark smear across the sleeve. The holding cell wasn't even a real one, just a cramped corner in the back of the Dover police station, partitioned off with a half-glass wall and a door that squeaked when opened, but never quite shut all the way. He'd been there for 3 hours, maybe 4. No one told him the time. No one told him anything. A woman had come in earlier and asked his name. He said, "Elijah." She wrote "unknown male" anyway. Then a guy with a badge and a mustache tried to ask if he was gang-affiliated. Eli just stared. The questions kept coming. Where do you live? Where are your parents? What's your social? What school do you go to? He didn't answer anymore. It didn't matter what he said. They didn't believe him. He didn't even ask about Shadow. He was too scared to know. At 8:47 a.m., someone finally remembered him. A young woman with sharp glasses and a clipboard came in and told him he'd be transferred to Dover Juvenile Court for a preliminary hearing that same morning. "But I didn't do anything," he said. She didn't look up from her clipboard. "Tell it to the judge." The courtroom smelled like old paper and pine-scented cleaner. It was too bright, the kind of bright that made you feel like you had something to hide even if you didn't. Single quotes T. Eli sat at the defendant's table in a chair too big for his frame. His ankles were shackled now too. The metal chain clinked when he shifted in his seat. Across from him, the prosecutor, Mr. Dane, stood tall in his gray suit. His tie was red. His voice was louder than it needed to be. "This is not just a case of petty theft," he said, walking slowly in front of the bench like someone on TV. "This is a matter of public safety. This boy, this individual, was apprehended after a disturbance at McAllister's Market. No ID, no guardian, no record of school attendance, no address. He gave no last name, no birth certificate, no social security number. For all intents and purposes, he does not exist." Murmurs floated from the benches. Eli didn't look at anyone. The judge, an older white woman with stern eyebrows and a nameplate that read Hun Virginia Monroe, leaned forward. "Do we have a legal name for the minor?" she asked. The court clerk shook his head. He stated, "Elijah, Your Honor, but without a full name or documentation. We've logged him as juvenile male, unknown." The judge frowned. "So, we're trying a ghost?" People chuckled. Eli's hands clenched. His court-appointed lawyer, a man named Mr. Poulter, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, cleared his throat and said, "Your Honor, my client, the youth here claims to be named Elijah, and I believe we should honor that claim for the sake of basic respect." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Respect doesn't carry much weight without paperwork, counselor. Can you provide me with any evidence that this boy is who he says he is?" Mr. Poulter blinked. "Not at this time." More whispers. One voice from the back said louder than intended, "Probably just some junkie's kid." Someone else added, "Or a runner. They use fake names." Eli stared at the floor. Not angry, just quiet. Not even surprised. Eli didn't flinch when they called him the boy with no name. By now he was used to it, used to the way people spoke over him, around him, never to him. The only name that ever really mattered anymore was the one Shadow knew. That was enough, until now. The courtroom felt like a theater, but he wasn't the actor. He was the object. The prop, the problem to be solved. Mr. Poulter, his court-appointed lawyer, tried to say something about due process and how Eli shouldn't be tried like a criminal without any formal investigation. But his words were hollow, like reading from a script he barely understood himself. Eli could feel it. The man wasn't here to defend him, just to mark the box that said, "Representation provided." The judge leaned back in her chair and looked down at Eli like he was a mess someone else should have cleaned up. "Son," she said, "do you have any living relatives? Anyone we can contact?" Eli opened his mouth, but the words felt dry. "My mom," he said finally. "She's in prison." The judge nodded slowly. "And your father?" "Dead," Eli replied, no emotion. The judge scribbled something on her notepad. Mr. Dane, the prosecutor, stepped in again, his voice booming like a man who enjoyed hearing himself speak. "Your Honor, given that this minor has no legal identity, no schooling record, no address, and no guardian, I propose he be held in protective juvenile custody until we can determine who he really is or where he belongs." That word "belongs" stung. Like he was a lost package, a stray dog, a thing. Not a person, just a misplaced object they were trying to catalog. "Do you have anything else to say for yourself?" the judge asked, her tone more tired than curious. Eli looked up, finally, meeting her eyes. "I didn't steal that bread. I was going to leave something for it." "A payment?" she said. "What kind?" He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out the chain. The tag, Shadow's dog tag, scratched, bent, but still readable. "Shadow, property of Elijah J." The courtroom hushed. "I was gonna leave this," Eli said. It's all I had. The judge stared at it for a long moment, as if unsure whether to be moved or annoyed. Mr. Dane scoffed. So he tried to barter a dog tag for food. Your Honor, that only proves my point. The boy is unstable. He needs state supervision. He needs someone to care, came a voice from the back. Everyone turned. A janitor in a gray uniform had stepped inside the courtroom. His hair was white, cut close. His posture slightly hunched. His name tag read Carl. He held his cap in his hands, nervously twisting it as he spoke again. I know that boy. The judge frowned. Sir, you are? Carl Hopkins, ma'am, custodian at Hillside Middle School. Been there 22 years. And your relationship to the defendant? He's not a defendant, Carl said. He's a kid, a quiet one. Came to our school for about 3 months last year. Didn't talk much. Kept his head down. But I remember him. Do you have proof of this? The judge asked. I don't need proof, Carl said. I got memory. I remember the day he cried in the stairwell because someone threw away his dog's food bowl. He said it was the last thing he had from before they took his mom. Mr. Dane interrupted. With all due respect, Your Honor, we can't base legal decisions on emotional recollections from school janitors. Carl looked straight at him. And we can't make moral ones from prosecutors who've never missed a meal. The room went still. Even the judge sat straighter. Mr. Hopkins, she said slowly, are you willing to make a statement for the record that you believe this child's name is Elijah? I don't just believe it, Carl said. I know it. He pulled something from his back pocket, a photo. Slightly wrinkled, but clear. It showed Ely sitting on the school steps, hoodie too big, shadow lying beside him, looking just as protective then as he did now. The judge took it, studied it, said nothing. Mr. Poulter finally leaned in. Your Honor, I respectfully request that we recognize this minor as Elijah James, and that we halt any further detention until a child welfare caseworker can intervene. The judge tapped her pen twice, then sighed. Motion granted. The court recognizes the minor as Elijah James, pending verification. Eli sat there, stunned. Not because he was free, he wasn't, not yet. But because, for the first time in what felt like forever, someone had said his name. Out loud, in front of people. And no one laughed. No one said that can't be right. They just accepted it. That feeling having your name given back to you, it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, deep, like something inside you unlocked. Something that had been nailed shut years ago. After the judge made her decision, the air in the courtroom seemed to shift. Not dramatically, no clapping, no cheers. But the silence wasn't cruel anymore. It was weighty. Like everyone finally understood something they should have seen all along. The judge gave instructions for Elijah, no longer juvenile male, unknown, to be held temporarily at the Dover Youth Care Center, pending placement. A child welfare representative would be assigned within 72 hours. Carl Hopkins asked if he could visit. The judge allowed it. Ailey was let out in handcuffs, but this time they weren't as tight. The officer didn't push him forward. And as they passed through the side hallway, Mr. Poulter, still fumbling with his file, stopped and said, "Good luck, Elijah." It was the first time he'd said his name. Eli didn't smile. But he nodded. And that meant more. The van that took him to the youth center was cold and quiet. He sat in the back, the only passenger. The guard up front didn't say a word the whole ride. Eli leaned his head against the window, watching the trees blur past. His fingers gripped the dog tag still hanging from his wrist. Shadow. He didn't know where the dog was. He didn't ask. He didn't want to hear that word, removed. Shelter, or worse, put down. When they arrived at the center, a tall woman with tired eyes and a clipboard greeted him. Ms. Roan. She didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. "We've got a bed for you," she said. "Temporary." He followed her down gray hallways, past kids who looked more angry than sad, doors with numbers, cameras in the corners, a locked rec room with a broken foosball table. His room was small, bare, a single bed with a thin mattress, a metal dresser. No windows, no warmth. Ms. Rohn handed him a bag of hygiene supplies and a pair of too big sweatpants. "Dinner's at 6. You don't have to eat, but it's all we've got," she said. He nodded, took the bag, sat on the bed. She hesitated at the door. "They're looking for your dog," she said softly. "We saw the footage. We're trying." Then she left. That night, Elijah didn't eat. He laid on the bed, staring at the ceiling, clutching the dog tag so tight it pressed into his palm. Somewhere Shadow was alone. Or worse, he closed his eyes and whispered into the quiet, "I'm still yours. You're still mine. Just wait a little longer." The next morning, Carl Hopkins showed up at the youth center. He wasn't supposed to, but he did. Said he had business with the facility director. Said he was a mentor. The receptionist didn't argue. Carl carried a paper bag and something under his arm. When Elijah walked into the visitor room, he froze. Carl stood there with a brown sack in one hand and under his arm a framed photo. Eli recognized it instantly. Shadow, sitting proud outside Hillside Middle, Eli kneeling beside him. He didn't remember anyone taking the picture. But there it was. Real. Carl handed over the paper bag. "Breakfast sandwich," he said. "Probably cold by now." Ellie took it but didn't open it. His eyes were locked on the photo. "They told me they might find him," Eli said quietly. "But I don't know if they're looking." Carl sat down across from him. "They're looking," he said. "I called everyone I could." "That dog means something." Eli stared at him. "Why'd you show up?" Carl took a long breath. "Because I've seen too many kids disappear, not run away. Disappear into paper files. Into systems that don't remember faces, just case numbers. You're not disappearing on my watch." Eli didn't know what to say to that. So he just whispered, "Thank you." Carl stood up to leave. At the door, he turned. "You ever been to the top of Miller Hill?" Eli shook his head. "When you get out of here, I'll take you. Best sunrise in Georgia. You bring your dog." Then he walked out. That night, as Elijah lay in bed, he heard the rain start. A soft tapping against the metal roof. Then, just past midnight, he heard something else. A voice outside the hallway door. And a word that snapped his heart awake. "Dog," someone said. Black tag, gray fur, limping. He jumped up. Pressed his ear to the door. Another voice. "We think it's him." Came back to the bridge, wouldn't move. Animal control brought him in. He had the tag on his neck. Said property of Elijah. Elijah's knees buckled. He slid down the wall and covered his face. He didn't cry, not really. But something inside him cracked open. They found him. Shadow had come back, come home. And for the first time in a very, very long time, Elijah James believed that maybe, just maybe, the world hadn't completely forgotten him. Carl Hopkins didn't set out to be anybody's hero. Not in this town, and certainly not at this age. Most days, he was just trying to finish mopping the back hallway before his knees gave out. People didn't notice janitors. That was part of the job. They passed by you like you were another fixture in the building, like the clock or the trash can or the fire alarm. You didn't speak unless spoken to, and even then, you were expected to keep it short. But Carl had always noticed more than he let on. That's how he first saw Elijah. It was a Monday morning, cold, cloudy. He remembered it because the school cafeteria had burned the eggs again, and the whole hallway had smelled like rubber and regret. Elijah had come in late, soaked from the rain, hair stuck to his forehead, clutching a backpack that looked like it had survived a war. No one asked him why he was wet. No one asked him anything. He just drifted into the back row of homeroom. Like smoke under a door. Kids are sharper than people give them credit for. They know when someone doesn't belong. They sense weakness like sharks sense blood. Within a week, they'd labeled Elijah as weird, quiet, probably poor. The kind of kid who never brought lunch, never raised his hand, and never fought back. But Carl noticed something else. The dog. Every morning, Elijah would walk up to the school gate, and sitting on the other side, right at the edge of the fence, was Shadow, always waiting. Rain or shine, Carl had watched the way the boy knelt to touch the dog's snout through the chain link before slipping inside the building. The way Shadow would stay posted there for hours, just lying in the dirt like a sentinel, until the final bell rang and the boy came back out. It wasn't until week 3 that Carl spoke to him. Elijah had been in the stairwell, curled into himself, knees up, arms wrapped around his head. Someone had dumped out his backpack and left a note taped to the side that read, "Return to lost and worthless." Carl didn't say anything at first. He just sat down beside him, slow and stiff, and held out a granola bar. The boy didn't take it, but he didn't run either. "You're not worthless," Carl had said. "You're just in a place that doesn't know how to see you." Elijah hadn't replied. Not then. But a week later, he left half a sandwich on Carl's rolling cart with a note that just said, "Thank you." The picture came months later. Carl had been testing out a used camera he'd bought at a garage sale. He didn't know why he brought it to work, just a feeling. He'd stepped out behind the school during lunch and saw Elijah sitting on the curb near the dumpsters, eating from a Tupperware container like it was a treasure chest. Shadow sat beside him, head resting on the boy's knee. Carl raised the camera. Click. The photo came out slightly crooked, a little overexposed. But it captured something no one else ever seemed to see: connection. That dog didn't just guard Elijah, he grounded him. And Elijah, despite everything, still had love left to give. Carl printed the photo and kept it in his drawer, and when Elijah stopped showing up, just vanished one day without a word, Carl took the picture out every few weeks and stared at it like a prayer he didn't know how to finish. Carl didn't talk much about his past. Not because he was ashamed of it, but because in Dover, people liked their memories small and simple. They didn't want to know that Carl had once been an Army field medic, or that he'd served 2 tours in Iraq patching up boys who cried out for mothers who'd already died. They didn't care that he'd returned home with his back bent and his sleep fractured into pieces he could never put back together. Dover liked janitors quiet, invisible. But Carl hadn't come home to be invisible. He just didn't want to fight anymore. He'd had enough of watching good people get hurt, enough of saluting coffins that were too light for their weight. So he took a job mopping the floors of Hillside Middle School for 22 years. And he watched, listened, and remembered. Elijah wasn't the first quiet kid Carl had seen slip through the cracks. But he was the first to carry himself like silence was armor, like speaking would give people one more reason to cut him. He was also the first who didn't flinch when Carl looked him in the eye. Most kids saw Carl and looked away. Eli didn't, he just saw him. Like he understood that sometimes the loneliest people were the ones still showing up every day, sweeping the broken pieces nobody else wanted to touch. When Carl saw the video on his phone, grainy, shaky, a clip shared on a local Facebook group, his stomach dropped. It showed a boy screaming for his dog, handcuffed, on the ground. The cry wasn't theatrical. It wasn't loud enough to be angry. It was the sound of someone being peeled away from the last thing tethering them to this world. Carl recognized the voice before he recognized the face. Elijah, he whispered. He watched the clip 10 times. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out the photo. The one he'd taken that day behind the school. He stared at it for a long while, then tucked it into a plastic sleeve, slipped it into his pocket, and picked up the phone. The receptionist at the courthouse didn't expect much from the old janitor with the limp. She smiled politely and tried to redirect him toward the public gallery. But Carl stood his ground. "I want to make a statement," he said. "I know the boy you've got in that courtroom. His name's Elijah James." She blinked. "Do you have legal custody?" "No." "Are you a relative?" "No." "Then I'm afraid I'm the one who saw him when no one else did," Carl interrupted, his voice low and steady. "And I've got something to show the judge." He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just waited. Sometimes the power wasn't in the volume. It was in the weight. She called a clerk. The clerk called a bailiff. The bailiff called someone. Higher. 20 minutes later, Carl was standing in the back of the courtroom, just as the prosecutor said, "He does not exist." Carl felt his jaw tighten. He waited for the judge to ask again about the boy's name. Waited for that room full of strangers to act like they could speak the truth without knowing the story. And then he spoke. "I know that boy." That moment changed everything. It didn't solve anything overnight. Elijah was still taken to a youth facility. Shadow was still missing. The judge didn't order a parade or issue a medal, but something cracked open. The courtroom had treated Elijah like a case file. Carl treated him like a human. And once you see someone as human, you can't unsee it. That night, a local reporter who'd been covering the hearing stopped Carl outside the courthouse. "Mr. Hopkins, is it true you were the first to identify the boy?" Carl looked at her for a long second before nodding. "Why'd you do it?" Carl didn't smile. "Didn't grandstand. He just said, because no one else would." The photo went viral by accident. Carl never meant for it to be anything more than a piece of truth he carried in his pocket. But after the hearing, a teacher from Hillside, Ms. Jennings, who'd always had a soft spot for the quiet kids, reached out. She asked to see the picture. Carl stopped by her classroom and handed her the print. She stared at it for a long time, then asked if she could take a photo of the photo. She posted it that afternoon with a caption that read, "He sat alone with his dog behind the cafeteria. Nobody saw him. Except the janitor. His name is Elijah James, and he matters." At first it got a few likes. A handful of comments from other teachers, former students who vaguely remembered that quiet boy who never smiled. Then someone shared it in a local parents group. Then a city council member reposted it. By the next morning, the photo had traveled beyond Dover. People didn't just see a kid anymore. They saw the outline of a system that had failed again. A system where a child could be reduced to a hoodie, a vague description, and a dog's bark. And yet, it wasn't the press releases or official statements that carried weight. It was that picture. Elijah, sitting on the curb, head down, Shadow beside him with his chin resting on the boy's leg. The angle of Carl's old camera had caught just enough of their faces to break hearts. You couldn't look at it without feeling something shift inside you. Someone made a hashtag. Hashtag his name is Elijah. Another posted, "Every kid needs one person who sees them. This janitor was his." A third, "We don't need heroes with capes. We need janitors with cameras." Carl didn't even own a smartphone. He didn't know what trending meant. But by the time a local news van showed up in front of Hillside Middle to ask for an interview, the office secretary had to explain that yes, the old man pushing the mop cart was the same person everyone online was calling the quiet witness. Carl didn't want fame. He didn't want credit. But when they asked for a quote, he said this: "If we waited for people with titles to do the right thing, a lot of kids would never make it out. Sometimes it just takes the guy with the mop." Across town, in a small office above a worn-out legal aid center, a young black attorney named Simone Alvarez was scrolling through her phone between meetings. She'd grown up 3 counties over. The kind of place where her skin made her both invisible and hyper-visible depending on who was looking. When she saw the photo, she stopped. She stared, and she remembered a boy she used to know. Not Elijah. Someone else. Her brother, gone now. The system ate him slowly: suspensions, court dates, juvenile hall, and finally the prison bus. All because no one stepped in when it mattered. All because no one said, "He's worth saving." She opened a new browser tab and searched, Elijah James plus Dover plus youth detention. She picked up her phone. Dialed a number. "I want to take his case," she said. The woman on the other end asked, "Who?" "His name is Elijah," Simone replied. "And I'm going to make sure this town never forgets it again." The youth center had never seen a liar like Simone Alvarez before. She didn't come in wearing an expensive suit or carrying a briefcase that screamed corporate. She wore dark jeans, a pressed navy blazer, and a silver chain with her grandmother's cross. But it wasn't her outfit that turned heads, it was her presence. Calm, unwavering, and sharp like polished stone. When she entered the meeting room where Elijah sat alone, still unsure if Shadow was really coming back, she didn't introduce herself the usual way. She didn't say attorney, or assigned counsel, or public defender. She sat across from him, folded her hands, and simply said, "Your name is Elijah James, and I believe you." For a long time he didn't speak. He just stared at the floor like maybe the carpet had answers no adult had ever bothered to offer. Then finally, "Do you know where my dog is?" Simone paused. "He's at a foster home. They're holding him for you. He's safe." Eli didn't cry, but his shoulders dropped like someone finally took a brick off his back. Simone leaned forward. "I'm going to get you out of here. Not just free from this building, but seen, heard. We're not just clearing your record. We're going to make them remember your name for the rest of their lives." Eli glanced up. "Why?" She smiled, soft but certain. "Because someone should have done it for my brother." The school assembly wasn't part of the plan. In fact, Carl had only agreed to it because the principal had begged. The kids at Hillside had seen the news. They'd seen the picture. They'd started asking questions about the kid who disappeared, the janitor who didn't, and the dog who waited. The district figured they could spin it as a teachable moment. A chance to talk about empathy, community, whatever buzzword looked good on a newsletter. Carl didn't care about the PR, but he cared about the kids, especially the ones who were still invisible. So he stood on stage that morning with a microphone in one hand and the photo in the other. The gym was packed. Teachers, students, parents, even some city officials who'd come to show support. Carl didn't read from notes. He just looked at the crowd and began. "You probably don't remember him," he said. "That's okay." Most people didn't. His name was Elijah James. He sat in the back, never talked much. Some of you teased him, some ignored him. Most of you forgot him the minute he stopped showing up. He held up the photo. "But this," he said, "this is the part none of you saw. Him feeding his dog half his lunch. Sitting in the cold because he didn't want to be seen crying inside. Protecting something he loved because no one was protecting him." He paused. "I was just the janitor. But I saw him. And if there's one thing I want every person in this room to understand, it's this. When someone is invisible, it's not because they don't matter. It's because too many of us have stopped looking." Silence. Then from the third row, a boy stood up. No one knew his name either. He'd been bullied for his stutter all year. He raised his hand and said slowly, "I remember Elijah. He gave me his apple one time." Then a girl stood up. "He helped me find my bus when I was new." One by one, students rose. Some with stories. Some just with quiet tears. By the time Carl stepped off stage, the principal was crying. The superintendent was crying. And one of the councilmen who'd voted against funding for homeless youth last year was pretending to check his phone, even though it had been off since the ceremony began. That afternoon, Elijah sat in the courtroom again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Simone sat beside him. Carl behind him, and a dozen students from Hillside filled the benches. In their hands they held copies of the photo. On their chests, hand-drawn stickers that read, "I see Elijah." The judge looked at the crowd, then at Elijah. Double quotes, "Mr. James," she said, "you have people here who believe in you. And more importantly, you have a voice. Would you like to say anything before I issue my ruling?" Elijah stood. Just a boy in hand-me-downs and worn sneakers. But when he spoke, the room held its breath. "My name is Elijah James," he said. "And I'm not a case. I'm not a hoodie. I'm not a file with missing parts. I'm a kid. I had a mom. I had a dog. I lost a lot. But I'm still here." Then softer, "And so is he." At that moment, the back doors opened. A staffer walked in, holding a leash. Shadow. Thin, limping, but tail wagging like he'd never stopped waiting. The courtroom broke. People gasped. Simone covered her mouth. Carl looked down to hide his tears. And Elijah ran not away, but toward the only thing that had ever waited long enough to be called home. The letter had been written with a blue pen so faint, it looked like time itself had tried to erase it. The paper was crumpled, edges brown from moisture, the handwriting small and shaky, clearly done by a child trying to sound older than he was. It had been tucked into the lining of Elijah's backpack, folded 5 times, hidden under the inside seam like it was a secret only meant for someone who truly cared. Simone Alvarez found it while organizing his belongings, days after the courtroom reunion with Shadow. She hadn't meant to snoop, but she'd asked for anything that might help build a deeper case file. Anything that proved Elijah's past, his humanity, his pain. The youth center staff gave her his few possessions in a plastic tote. A pair of shoes that didn't match. A spiral notebook with half the pages torn out. And the bag. She almost missed the letter. But when she felt the stiffness along the bottom of the fabric, she turned the bag inside out and found it lodged between threads. When she unfolded it, her hands stilled. Then her breath. Then her heart. Dear Mama, I still talk to you in my head. I hope you can still hear me. I know you said to stay with Miss Loretta, but she told me not to call her Mama, and I think she didn't mean to say it, but she called me a problem. I didn't mean to be. I tried to be quiet. I even washed my own socks. I didn't cry when you left. I only cried when they gave my room to her cousin's baby. I slept in the garage, but it's okay. Shadow sleeps close. He's warm. Sometimes I smell your hair in the wind. Sometimes I pretend you're on the other side of the fence at school, and I just can't reach you. I know you said not to go hungry, but sometimes Shadow gets my part. He doesn't complain like I do. He still waits. Even when I don't come back till dark. I think he's the only one who knows my name. They just say kid or you. Or move. Anyway, I still remember how you signed your name. I write it sometimes. Not for them, for me. Love, your son, Elijah James. Simone read it twice. Then a third time. And then she cried, not with sobs, not with noise, but the kind of crying that builds in the back of the throat and slides down silently, until it lands in your chest like a stone. She held the letter like it might fall apart. Like it was sacred. Because in many ways it was. This was no ordinary child welfare case. This was a testimony. A confession, a memory, and most of all this was proof. Proof that somewhere in the tangle of bureaucracy and silence, a boy had tried to hold on to something soft, something good, something real, and the system had ignored it. Until now. Simone walked into the Dover City Records office the next morning with a mission. The letter had mentioned Miss Loretta. That was the name they needed. For hours she dug through old temporary placement records. Every child placed in emergency foster care within the county over the last 7 years. Most files were incomplete. Some were so redacted they were practically blank. But then, tucked in a scanned PDF labeled Emergency Youth Shelter, 2016. She found it. James Elijah, age 9, mother incarcerated. Temporary custody granted to Loretta N. Hughes. Pine Row Trailer number 18. Duration of placement, 3 weeks. Status upon exit. Self-removed. Minor could not be located after October 17th. Self-removed. That's what they called it when a child ran away. No mention of follow-up. No warrant. No missing persons alert. Just could not be located. Like a misplaced file. Simone printed it, held it beside the letter. It was enough, more than enough. Now she had a name, a date, a location, and a voice. It was time to make the town hear it. Simone didn't go to the press right away. She went to the school board meeting. The room smelled like burnt coffee and denial. Every chair was filled. Parents, teachers, district officials, and reporters in the back, pretending not to record. It was supposed to be a routine budget meeting. That changed the moment Simone walked up to the public comment podium with the letter in her hand. "My name is Simone Alvarez," she said. "I represent Elijah James." A stir moved across the room. Everyone had heard the name. Some whispered it like a confession. Others like a curse. She held up the letter. "This is a piece of paper written in a child's handwriting," she said. "But it carries more truth than any of the adult reports I've read in the last 2 weeks." She read it out loud. Word for word. No commentary. Just the words of a boy who was invisible. By the time she finished, half the room was still. A few heads bowed. One teacher wiped her eye. A man near the back whispered, "Jesus." Then Simone looked directly at the board. "This letter was written while Elijah was under your care. In a county placement. While attending one of your schools. While sleeping in a garage." The superintendent, gray hair, red tie, shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Alvarez, while we sympathize, I don't need your sympathy," she said. Voice calm but slicing. "I need your accountability." She laid the documents on the table. The placement file. The record of his disappearance. The fact that the county had marked him as self-removed and done nothing since. There is a child in our system who begged to be seen. And we responded with silence. She took a breath. And now the world is watching. It hit the local paper the next morning. The letter they tried to ignore. Front page. Bold type. Underneath, the entire text of Elijah's note. Printed beneath the photo Carl had taken of him in shadow. The internet did the rest. Social workers called their supervisors. School counselors searched their memories. A retired judge shared it on Facebook and wrote, "This is why some of us quit." The mayor's office received 2,000 emails in 36 hours. By the third day, it reached national media. NBC ran a segment titled, "When the System Forgets, the Story of Elijah James." Shadow was featured too, lying beside Elijah during a supervised visit, tail thumping every time the boy said his name. That footage alone gathered over 4 million views, but not everyone was thrilled. Some called it sensationalism, a weaponization of tragedy. Others blamed the mother, or the neighbors, or the bureaucracy. But no one could deny the truth, because the letter didn't lie. It was written with the kind of honesty that couldn't be faked. A child asking quietly to matter. Elijah didn't know how famous he was becoming. He didn't have a phone. He didn't check Twitter. He didn't see his name trending, or his photo reposted by actors and senators and school principals from towns he'd never heard of. What he saw was simpler, slower, more real. He saw that the social worker called him by his name now. He saw that the other boys at the center stopped teasing him. He saw that the staff didn't lock the rec room during his free hour anymore. And most of all, he saw Shadow every Thursday during supervised outdoor visits. The old dog would limp across the courtyard like a soldier on duty, collapse into Elijah's arms, and sigh like he'd found the only place that mattered. That was enough. Until the day Simone brought him a copy of the article. She didn't say much. She just handed it to him folded in half. The ink still fresh and weighted. He stared at the headline, "The Letter They Tried to Ignore." And under that, his own handwriting. The letter he'd written 2 years ago. He hadn't realized it. Still existed. He hadn't realized it would be read, aloud in front of strangers, reprinted, shared, analyzed. It's okay if you're mad, Simone said. Elijah shook his head. I'm not mad, he said quietly. I just didn't think anyone would ever read it, not really. Then, after a long pause, I wrote it for her. For your mother? Simone asked. He nodded. I thought if I wrote it down, it would count, like it'd make me real again. Simone blinked hard, but didn't speak. She didn't have to. They both understood what it meant for a boy to write himself into existence, for a system to try to erase him anyway. Meanwhile, inside a gray government building on the edge of town, two people sat in a closed-door meeting. One was the director of the County Child Welfare Division. The other was a lawyer from the state office. Both were sweating. This could bring a federal audit, the director said. It already brought a CNN producer, the lawyer replied. Sat in silence for a moment. Then the director picked up a file. From his desk, Elijah's file, slim, underdeveloped, pages missing. How the hell does a kid vanish for 4 years in our system? He muttered. And no one notices? The lawyer didn't answer, because the answer wasn't complicated. Everyone noticed. They just didn't look long enough to care. Until now. At Hillside Middle, the bulletin board in the main hallway had been stripped of honor roll announcements and field trip flyers. In its place, a framed print of Elijah's letter, surrounded by handprints drawn by students, each signed with a single sentence. I see you. Carl visited after hours, walking the halls slowly, his mop bucket clicking. Behind him, he stopped in front of the board, stared at the letter, and didn't speak. He just smiled. Then he turned and kept moving, because there were still floors to clean. And still kids worth seeing. They held the hearing in the biggest room they had. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. The courtroom overflowed. People stood against the walls. Reporters lined the back. Local officials in suits squeezed in beside high schoolers in hoodies. Carl had to give up his seat to an elderly woman with oxygen tubes who whispered, I came because of the dog. At the center of it all sat Elijah. Not in cuffs, not in the back row, but at the front table beside Simone, who looked like a storm that had found its purpose. The hearing wasn't just about Elijah anymore. It was about the system, the silence, the decisions that led to a child sleeping under a bridge with a dog as his only witness. The judge, Federal Review appointee, called the room to order. Simone stood. In front of you, she said, is a letter written by a child who believed no one would ever read it. You've all seen it. You've all shared it. But what you haven't done, what this town hasn't done, is respond. She turned slowly to face the crowd. I don't need your outrage, she said. I need your action. She gestured to Elijah, who sat with his hands folded in his lap, the dog tag wrapped around his wrist like a lifeline. This boy didn't ask to be a symbol. He asked to be seen. And now that you've seen him, you don't get to look away. She let the words hang in the air. Then she turned to Elijah and gently asked, Do you want to read it? He froze for a second. The room felt too big again, but then he nodded. She handed him the paper. He stood. He unfolded it slowly. His hands trembled, but his voice didn't. And for the first time, Elijah James read his own letter out loud. Every word, every heartbreak, every hope, no one interrupted, no one breath. By the end, the room was silent in the way only truth can silence people. Then, as he finished, a voice from the back whispered, Amen. Then another. Then, a ripple of clapping, not applause. Not celebration, but acknowledgement. Recognition. The sound of people finally seeing what they'd missed for far too long. In the weeks that followed, the county passed Elijah's bill. A new policy requiring immediate follow-up on all youth marked as self-removed from temporary placements. It also funded a new tracking system, real counseling in schools, And at Carl's insistence, a line item for hiring full-time staff trained specifically to look for the quiet kids. The bulletin board at Hillside stayed up. The media moved on. Eventually, but the change stayed, because some letters, once read aloud, can't be unread. Some names, once remembered, can't be erased. And some kids, once seen, can't ever go invisible again. They flew him to D.C. on a Thursday. It was Elijah's first time on a plane. He didn't say much during takeoff, but Simone noticed how tightly he gripped the armrest, how his eyes stayed locked on the clouds outside, like he couldn't quite believe the earth had let go. He wore a navy sweater, 2 sizes too big, and a pair of slacks borrowed from a donation drive. Shadow couldn't come on the trip, but he'd licked Elijah's fingers all morning before they left, as if to say, "You got this, kid." The U.S. Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions had extended the invitation. It was voluntary. Symbolic, really, but Simone knew what it meant. And so did Elijah, because sometimes being asked to speak, really speak, is the first time. The world tells you, we're ready to listen. The hearing chamber was colder than Elijah expected. Cold like hospitals, cold like foster care lobbies, marble pillars, ornate trim, rows of heavy chairs, cameras, notepads, suits. Senator Langston, a former schoolteacher from Oregon, chaired the committee that day. She opened the session with statistics, rising youth homelessness, broken child welfare systems, case files that vanished like smoke. Then she paused. "We've heard from experts," she said. "We've read the data, but numbers don't bleed. People do." She turned to Elijah. "And sometimes the most powerful truths come from the youngest voices." She nodded gently. "Elijah James, the floor is yours." He stood slowly. The microphone was too high. Someone adjusted it. He looked out at the room, not at the senators, but at the students seated behind them. Interns, pages, college kids who didn't know what it meant to sleep under bridges. Or maybe some of them did. Then he opened his backpack and pulled out a wrinkled sheet of notebook paper. Not the famous letter, a different one, a new one. He unfolded it, placed it on the table, and began. "I was 9 the first time I slept under the bridge. I didn't plan it. I didn't even know how to get there. I just walked until my legs gave out. It was October, cold. I had 1 hoodie and half a sandwich." He paused, took a breath. There was a dog already under the bridge, just sitting there. I thought he'd bite me. He didn't. He just looked at me like he'd been waiting, so I sat down. And we stayed like that all night. He looked up. That dog's name is Shadow. And I think he saved my life. He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he continued. "I didn't run away because I hated my mother. I ran because I thought if I stayed, I'd ruin her chances of getting out. I didn't want to be a burden. And every time I tried to tell someone that I got told to move, or sit down, or fill out a form I didn't understand." His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't crack. He read like someone who'd carried these words in his chest too long. "I wrote a letter once, to my mom. I didn't know how mail worked. I didn't have a stamp. I just folded it and hid it inside my backpack, I thought. Maybe if I wrote it, it'd count for something. It didn't. Not until someone found it years later." He looked right at the senators now. "That's what I want you to understand. When you make policies, we're the ones they land on, not your desks, not your inboxes. Us, the kids. The ones no one sees until it's too late." He leaned forward. "I don't want pity. I want change. I want fewer kids with letters that never get read. I want more janitors who don't look away, more lawyers who answer calls, and more adults who ask the hard question, where did this child go, before it's someone else's headline." When Elijah finished reading, he didn't sit down right away. He stood there for a few seconds, eyes steady, back straight, not defiant, not rehearsed, just real. And in that chamber, where most words evaporated into formalities. His didn't. They stayed. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent. Senator. Langston cleared her throat. Her voice, for once, didn't sound like a politician's. It sounded like someone remembering how to be human. Elijah, she said softly, I want to thank you not just for speaking, but for surviving. We are not here to make you carry the weight. We are here to listen, and now to act. She looked down the row. Are there any questions for Mr. James? For a moment, no one spoke. Then a senator from Illinois, a man with glasses too big for his face, lifted his mic. Elijah, he said, if you could change one thing about the system, just one, what would it be? Elijah didn't hesitate. I'd change the way. Silence is rewarded, he said. Too many people get promoted for pretending not to see kids like me. Another senator, a woman from Maine, leaned in. What kept you going? Elijah blinked. Then. A dog. A janitor. And the hope that maybe, someday, someone would say my name and mean it. Simone sat behind him, fists clenched in her lap, not out of fear, but out of pride so intense it had nowhere else to go. The video of Elijah's testimony was uploaded by CSPAN that afternoon. By evening, it had been clipped, captioned, and stitched into every social media platform known to man. Within 24 hours, #say their names trended again. But this time, not just for the dead, for the forgotten. For the living. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He just told the truth. And it was louder than anything else in that room. New York Times columnist Elijah James reminded us why we write laws in the first place. Senator Langston, in an interview with NPR, that kid didn't break. The system did. A comment with 1.2 million likes. But while the internet roared, Elijah sat quietly in the corner of a modest guest room Simone had arranged in a local DC apartment. Shadow slept beside his bed, curled up tight, tired from the plane, unfazed. By fame. Elijah was holding a letter again, a different one. Handwritten. From the woman they once said had failed him, his mother. The envelope was plain. No return address. No logo. Just a crooked stamp and handwriting that leaned hard to the right, like it had been written on a metal table by someone whose hands had learned to shake. Only when no one was watching. Elijah turned it over twice before opening it. Simone didn't rush him. She waited in the kitchen, stirring tea she didn't plan to drink. Shadow, as always, rested one paw gently over Elijah's foot. He opened it slowly, careful not to tear. The paper inside was yellowed, slightly prison stationery. One page, full. He read it once, then again. Then folded it back with the same care one might give to an old photograph. Simone stepped into the doorway. You okay? He nodded. She said. She saw the video, he said. A guard showed it to her on their phone. He paused. She said. She didn't know I was still alive. They told her I'd been placed with a foster family, and then nothing. She said she prayed for me every night, but stopped writing letters when none ever came back. Simone's voice was soft. Do you believe her? Elijah looked down at his hands. I don't know if it matters. I just know. She wrote this one, and I got it. That's more than I had. He didn't cry, but Shadow nuzzled closer, and Simone whispered, sometimes the letter that arrives late is the one that changes everything. Back in Dover, the ripple effect of Elijah's testimony hit home faster than anyone expected. The State Education Board issued an emergency memo requiring school districts to review all inactive student files from the last 5 years. The Juvenile Justice Division launched an audit of every case labeled self-removed. But the biggest shift wasn't legislative. It was personal. At Hillside Middle, students asked new questions. They looked longer at kids sitting alone at lunch. Teachers began holding quiet conferences, one-on-one check-ins with students who didn't raise their hands, who didn't act out, who just ... disappeared while still sitting in their seats. Carl, now a minor local celebrity, though he still wore the same shoes, got invited to speak at a teacher training seminar. He didn't want to. Said he wasn't a speaker. Said he didn't belong behind a microphone, but he showed up anyway, and he said one thing that stuck more than any slideshow ever could. You don't need a title to notice a child. You just need to slow down enough to care. Elijah returned to Dover 2 weeks after his Senate testimony. Not with a parade, not with press. Just with Shadow Simone and a manila folder labeled Elijah James Reinstatement. The folder held more than papers. It held his birth certificate, his school transcripts, his social security number, his name, all of it. Restored. Simone handed it to him as they stepped off the bus. He tucked it inside his backpack, zipped it up, and smiled. For the first time, everything inside that bag belonged to him. They went back to the bridge on a quiet Sunday morning. It was Simone's idea. But Elijah didn't hesitate. He patted Shadow's leash, the same old hoodie he wore the night he was taken, and one more thing, a small, laminated printout of his letter, now framed in black plastic. When they arrived, the air was still. Sky hung low with clouds, and the wind curled around the overpass like it remembered everything that happened there. The space was just as he left it. The concrete stains, the crooked rebar, the way the ground dipped slightly near the east pillar. But it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt honest. Shadow sniffed the dirt, circled the edge, then lay down in the same spot he once waited through rain cold. And silenced. Elijah crouched beside him. This is where it started, he said, but it's not where it ends. He took the frame from his bag and placed it gently in the gravel, propped between two rocks. On the front, in simple bold letters, this is where he waited, this is where he was found. Below it, Elijah James, age 14, survivor of silence. No grand speeches. No media, just the boy, the dog, and the memory. Carl arrived a little later, carrying two things, a folding chair and a cup of hot chocolate. He didn't say much, just nodded and sat beside them. Then came Maya, the little girl from the curb, now living with a foster family nearby. She wore a purple jacket and carried a flower she picked from someone's yard. She placed it beside the frame, then sat cross-legged next to Elijah. More came after. A teacher, a librarian, a bus driver, kids from school, a pastor, a postal worker, a nurse, people who'd once walked past that bridge without a second glance. Now they stood quietly in a line, not to pray, not to protest, just to witness. To say, in presence if not words, we see you now. Elijah didn't speak much that day, but when someone asked if he was okay, he said this: I used to think my story started here, but now I know it just passed through. And then he smiled. The kind that doesn't reach the lips but lives in the eyes. The kind that says, I made it. I was real the whole time. Shadow thumped his tail softly in agreement, and the bridge, once a shelter of shame, became something else. Entirely, a landmark, a memory, a beginning. They didn't build a statue. Elijah never wanted one. He didn't ask for streets renamed or holidays marked in his honor. What he wanted was quieter, harder, and more important. He wanted the system to remember. Not with marble, but with movement. Not with plaques, but with policies. That fall, the Elijah James Education Restoration Act passed unanimously across multiple state legislatures. It wasn't loud. It didn't trend. But it worked. Every public school was now required to conduct quarterly check-ins on students with prolonged absences, especially those listed as homeless, withdrawn, or no parent response. Districts had to file reports with a new office, the Center for Student Traceability and Well-Being. A mouthful, sure, but staffed with people like Elijah, people who'd lived what he survived, people who knew what it felt like to be invisible. And just like that, his name lived on. Not as a headline, as a safeguard, But that wasn't the only place it echoed. At the local community center, a boy named Marquis sat cross-legged on the floor, petting Shadow gently as Elijah read from a children's book. It was part of a program they started, story time, for kids who needed more than stories. Every week, Elijah read to them. Not books about superheroes or castles. Books about real people. People who failed and tried again. People who were forgotten and found. Sometimes, he'd pause halfway through a sentence and ask the kids, "Who do you think this person needed most at this moment?" And a voice would call out, "A mom," another, "A teacher," sometimes, "A dog." And every so often, quietly, someone who cared. Shadow would thump his tail like he agreed with all of it. One evening, after everyone had gone home, Carl stopped by the center, holding a small box. "I got something," he said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "It's not much. But I thought maybe you should have it." Inside was a bronze key, engraved with a tiny number, 417. "The locker," Elijah said softly. "The one at the bus station," Carl nodded. "They cleared it out months ago, but I saved the key. Figured maybe you'd want to hang on to it. Remind yourself where you started." Elijah didn't take it right away. He looked at it for a long time, then smiled. "I don't need it to remember anymore," he said. "But maybe one day, a kid like me might." He walked to the bulletin board near the front desk, pinned the key beneath a photo of himself and Shadow under the bridge, and wrote in black marker, "If you're lost, this key opened my world. Yours might be next." Years passed. Elijah spoke. At schools, hospitals, city councils, never for fame. Always for stories. He told them about cold benches and hot tears. About the hunger that was worse than food, the hunger for a name. But he also told them about warm dogs and cold chocolate. Milk. About a girl who refused to forget him. About a man who once held a mop and now held a microphone. He never once told them what to believe. He just told them what happened. And let the truth do the rest. The last time Shadow went under the bridge, he was slower. His paws were white with age, his movements gentle. Elijah carried him most of the way, setting him down softly beside the same frame in the gravel. People still came there, still left notes, still remembered. Shadow rested his head on Elijah's knee. They stayed like that for a while. When they got up to leave, Elijah whispered, "This time, we're going home. And you're not waiting anymore." When Shadow passed, the community center held a memorial. Dozens of kids showed up. Many brought drawings. One boy brought a note that simply said, "He listened." Elijah kept that note in his wallet. More than medals. More than headlines. That was legacy. In the years that followed, Elijah didn't become famous, but in small, quiet ways his name became the one they whispered when the system forgot to look. The one they taught interns on their first day. The one carved into a park bench outside a school where no child ever again slipped through without a call, a knock, a second chance. The one that reminded the world, sometimes the strongest voice. Comey's from the one they tried to silence. They didn't expect him to walk in, not through those double doors. Not wearing that navy blue robe with the gold trim. Not with the tassel hanging gently from the side of his cap. And certainly not with that quiet smile that said, "I made it here without your permission." The auditorium was packed. People shifted in their seats, some thumbing through the program, others whispering about their kids' futures. No one knew that one of the names listed toward the back, Elijah James, was the same name a senator once scoffed at as a ghost in the system. Elijah didn't walk across the stage like the others. He moved with a different rhythm, as if each step carried the weight of every night he spent under that bridge, every courtroom he stood in alone, every bureaucrat who pretended not to see him. And as he reached the center of the stage, the principal leaned in and whispered, "I remember your letter." For a moment, Elijah just stood there. And then the audience rose. Not everyone at once. It began with one teacher in the far left row, Ms. Harding, who used to leave extra sandwiches in her desk drawer just in case. Then a janitor near the aisle, Carl, who once gave him a ride home when he had no home. Then the librarian who saved his seat every Saturday. And slowly the ripple grew until the room was a sea of standing applause. There were tears. Not Elijah's. He just looked out and nodded once, as if to say, "This isn't just for me." Because on the screen behind him wasn't just his name dotted. Was a photo of a young boy curled up under a bridge, arms around a black and white dog. And beneath it, he once had no voice. Now he advocates for thousands. He walked off the stage and into a sea of arms teachers, social workers, volunteers, and strangers who had quietly followed his journey online. They handed him flowers, letters, even a framed photo of Shadow. Someone whispered, he would be proud. And Elijah said, he always was. He didn't return to the bridge to mourn. He came back to rebuild it. Years had passed, but the underpass still held the same. Cracks, the same stains, the same hum of cars above. But this time, Elijah didn't come alone. Behind him were city workers, high schoolers in volunteer shirts, architects, and even a city councilman who once tried to evict him. The project was simple in spirit, complicated in politics. Turn the keyless city councilman who once tried to evict him. The project was simple in spirit, complicated in politics. Turn the city councilman who once tried to evict him. Bridge into a shelter by day and a mentorship center by night. Give kids like he once was a place to be seen before they disappear. The name of the center? Shadow's Rest. Built in memory of the dog who never left him. A bronze statue sat at the center of the space, a boy and his dog looking out from beneath the bridge, not with sorrow, but with hope. And carved into the base, for every kid they called invisible. The day it opened, Elijah didn't speak much. He just stood under the overpass, surrounded by the hum of drills and the laughter of children painting murals on the walls. One girl asked, "Were you really homeless here?" He nodded. "I was really everything here." She looked confused but smiled anyway. That night, long after the ribbon was cut and the speeches made, Elijah sat alone on the bench under the bridge now. Cleaned, painted, and filled with light. He held the worn collar of Shadow in his hand. "You never left," he whispered. And in the quiet, he could almost feel the weight against his leg again. The warm breath, the slow, loyal heartbeat. He closed his eyes. The bridge didn't hum anymore. It pulsed. In the end, he didn't just get a diploma. He got a standing ovation. And he turned the same bridge where they once ignored him into a beacon for every kid who's ever been called invisible. If Elijah's journey stirred something in you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes, the smallest voices echo the loudest.